back to my channel, The Inked Reader. It's a new day, but old Eva. As always, I'm trying to film with the remaining light of the day. As always, I was at work all day, just came home. It's around 7 p.m. so hopefully I can do this before it gets too dark. And it has been a crazy month, April. I am here to do my wrap-up, and I guess the explanation very briefly is that this month work-wise was very intense, and I had planned this huge reading month where it was a break from university before May started and my exams in May, and I planned to read these big books and having an awesome reading month. Instead, I ended up having a lot of very intense cases for work, a lot of emergencies, me working until 9-10 p.m, and I became very stressed, and then sometimes I prefer maybe to watch something instead of reading just because I was mentally exhausted. Spoiler alert for the statistics that are coming up in a second. I didn't do as well as I was planning to do, which seems to be the case because I had a month where I was so busy with university and work and I did great, and then this month which I had just work mostly didn't go so well. Now that the ranting is out of the way, I am gonna give you a bit of statistics of what I read in May. So in April, I've read a total of 10 things, which doesn't sound that bad, but I have read 7 physical books, 2 audiobooks and 1 manga, which I believe it's the first one of the year we actually am reading. And only the physical books amounted to a total of pages of 2,707. In terms of years, I read 1 book that was between the 1900 and 2000. 9 books were written in the 2000 forward, so after 2000, and no new release. And I've read 5 books from female authors and 5 books from male authors, so perfect there. Half of my tibia I've read only 6 books of 10 I was aiming for, which is, I think it's the worst month since I began to do these 10 reading challenges every month. And in terms of targets, I've read 2 YA, so young adults, and 8 adult books. In terms of stars, I've read 1 book was in the range of 1 star, 2 books were in the range of 2 stars, 2 books were in the range of 3 stars, and 3 books were in the range of 4 stars. So reading, it was a very mixed bag, I'd say. Again, probably the worst month with the lowest rated books in all the months since the beginning of the year. And as far as genre goes, I've read 1 non-fiction, 1 classic, 1 literary fiction, 2 horror, 1 crime, 1 contemporary, and 3 fantasy. Of those fantasy, 2 I categorize them as YA fantasy and 1 as a court intrigue fantasy. I've got a link down below and maybe up here the video where I talk about subgenre fantasy and my TBR of reading subgenres of fantasy. So the books that I am still currently reading from April are Jeffrey Rebirth by Philip Sudgen. This is the true crime pick for the month, and I'm also still reading The 5 by Haley Rubenhold, which is a non-fiction book. And then I am carrying this over, if you've seen my TBR, you'll probably already know Going Poster, which I did not get to read in April. So I'm reading this for the Disco World series. And the last one that I did not finish and I'm carrying over forever probably is Paradise Lost by John Milton. Not forever, but this was the pick for my fantasy TBR in April. This is the Christian fantasy, and it's also a classic, clearly. And I didn't realize, I didn't think about how hard it would be for me to read these in English. English is my second language, obviously, as you can tell, and this is written in verses, and it's very old style English probably, and it's a very dense read. So I started reading this and I was like, I don't understand a word of what this guy is saying. It sounds cool, but I'm not grasping it. So I'm basically reading 2 pages a day if I can. At the beginning when I was learning English, I tended to read and look up every word, but because these are words that I don't think are mostly news anymore, I'm not inclined to do that and just, read this with a dictionary. I'm taking my time. It probably take all year to finish this. I'm trying. So the first book I finished in the month was Scared Silent by Mildred Muhammad. This was the DV memoir pick for April. DV stands for domestic violence. I link down below all the previous video. I'm doing this series where I review DV memoirs. In this case, Mildred Muhammad, she was the wife of the deceased sniper, who is this spree killer, serial killer. And in this, Mildred explains how she met John, how they got married, what happened when they divorced, and how he became the deceased sniper. And I've done a whole review for this, going details. So if you're interested, it's linked down below. This is a very weird one because, again, we've got a domestic violent partner who turns serial killer. So yeah, check that review out if you want to. Then I listened to the audiobook of The Embers of Salt and Fortune. This is a fairly recent new release and it's just a 3 hours long audiobook, so it's a kind of more of a novella. I categorize these as court fantasy, and if I remember correctly, because it's been a while and I listened to this on audiobook while I was very distracted doing other stuff, I'll be honest. But it's a story about this empress and her maid, and it's a story about how this empress got married off to this man, and then how she lost her fortune and how she kind of recovered it and how the maid helped her. And I'm doing a terrible job explaining this. I'm so sorry. I think I would not suggest to listen to the audiobook of this, not because there was anything wrong with the narrator, but I realized that some narration style, some writing style don't click with me when it comes down to audiobooks. Certain writing style, if I'm listening to the book, they just don't work. And the more beautiful they are, the more hard for me is to fully appreciate them through audiobooks. So that was my mistake completely. I think if I was to read these in a physical format, I would have loved this. And that's the same reason why I didn't rate this, because I didn't pay enough attention. I got too much distracted while listening to it, and I think it's simply because of writing style, because I was doing other stuff at the same time. So it's also mostly my fault, as always. Definitely a diverse and inclusive short fantasy. I'm recommending these, I'd say, if you like fantasy, if you read the synopsis, sounds appealing to you, just pick up a physical book. Just don't be me. I think of all the suggestions I've given ever, just don't be me. It's probably the best one. Anyway, I have then proceeded to read Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. I don't know. This is a literary fiction which came up as my TBR jar pick. So I picked this randomly from the TBR jar. So this is the story of the Lee family. The Lee family are a Chinese-American family living in the 70s in USA. They're living a normal life, quote unquote, when one day one of their daughters is found dead in the lake. And this is following the aftermath of the death in the family, but you get a lot of what happened before. So you are kind of going back and forth of post-death and pre-death and what led to the death itself. Literary fiction is, first of all, a genre that I am exploring, and with exploring I mean that I tend not to read much of it, but I am beginning to delve more into it because I think it has some gems. This is also a debut novel and it's definitely remarkable. I get why now Celeste Ng books are getting all the praise they have. I absolutely loved the writing style, and when it comes down to actually do a proper review of this, I'm at loss of words because this felt so realistic. It felt like reading a memoir, like reading a private diary, if it makes sense, but from different perspectives, because you follow all the characters in this family. And I think also she almost writes as she was bringing to the page part of the subconscious of the mind of these characters. Like it feels like what she's saying without shame, because she's expressing some very haunting thoughts in a way that it's so realistic. You're there, you're suffering with them. So I will definitely check out more by her, and I'm definitely impressed by this. Take that as my final review. I honestly would have to spend so much time to delve deep into these. It feels like it's such a layered story that we don't have that time, basically. Then I've read Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This is a modern classic by a Russian author, and this is a very famous story. It's a story of this 40-odd-ish years old man who falls in love with a 13 years old called Dolores, aka Lolita, and it's basically a story of how he ends up being the carer of this girl and having a sexual relationship with this girl, and what happens to him, basically. I know that usually I don't give that much details about the plot, but this is Lolita, so probably literally everybody knows what this is about. And I think it's very important to mention that although this is about a sexual relationship between a 40 years old man and a 13 years old, it's very much hinted. You don't get graphic scenes. It's not heavily and on that side. I've had the couple 3-4 sentences that are there that indicate that this is happening are very disturbing. Just be aware of that. And I would suggest to just skip these. Honestly, I hated these. I gave it 1.5 stars, and the only reason why the 5.5 was there is because the writing style, although it didn't work for me, and I thought it was boring as fuck. This is so freaking boring. I still recognize that there is some skills behind it. And at the beginning, the first probably 70-80 pages, I was hooked, I was interested. And then it was just, oh, it's just a bunch of these forever for like 400 pages or something. So it was cool at the beginning, and then, yeah. So first of all, this book has got a forward at the beginning where it gives away the ending. So the ending of the book is in that chapter at the beginning. Although I would have not known, first of all, because I skipped it, I'll be really honest, at the beginning. And also I would not know unless I read the review, because the way it's written is not very clear. So what kind of book put the end at the beginning is just, well, anyway. I didn't like that choice. And also, this book, if you don't like books that tell you instead of showing you, you're gonna despise this. This is gonna be the antichrist for you if you don't like that kind of style, because none of this is showed. This is an entire story told by these men post events, and it's full of freaking boring facts. Like, you get, honestly, in 40 pages you could have described everything that happened in this book. 40 pages, and instead we got 400, so you have to guess how he filled these 400 pages, right? And he filled them with details of their traveling around USA, and him describing Lolita, her physical appearance, her behavior in so many details. And I like flowery poetic writing, but not when it's just 400 pages of literally nothing. You don't get any dialogues basically in all of this. The dialogues are so little, and it's so dense pages of literally him describing things and just put a lot of adjectives in, and it's boring. I wanted to DNF this so badly. I was curious to see why people in general appreciate this book. And then I realized at the end that I don't also understand why the author thought that reading a book like this was okay. I don't see the point of writing a book like this. And although it's recognized, I believe, by everybody, and the author, and probably even the protagonist recognize that what he's doing is problematic, it's still a modern classic. So it's still something that's read and that people will idealize in their mind. And why? Like, what was the point of this book? Then I've listened to Night of the Dragon. This is me finishing a series, because I've been DNFing so many of the books in Finish Ending series TBR that I felt a bit guilty. I'm not finishing any book in this TBR, I need to finish the series. So I listened to the audiobook of Night of the Dragon by Julie Kagawa. This is the third book in a fantasy YA series. Basically, you follow this Kitsune, this young girl who has to go on this adventure to retrieve the scrolls that are usually used every 1,000 years or something to summon a dragon, and this dragon will grant a wish of the person who summoned him. This time there is a bad guy who's going after the dragon to try and summon the dragon, and of course our Kitsune protagonist and her friends that she meets along the way have to stop this summoning to happen. It's just a trilogy, and it's a lot of fun. It does read like an anime. It is to a certain degree true. I had like kind of okay feeling about the first two books, but I really enjoyed the last book. It was very long. It was a very, like, 13 hours audiobook or something, and it was rich of events. Like, there was plot twist after plot twist, and it definitely did not end in the way I was thinking. It definitely took twists and turns that I didn't see coming and I was not expecting for the genre, which I really appreciated. And I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed the characters, the relationship, and most of all, it was just a bloody entertaining adventure, which I just needed. And again, it's one of those which work very well with an audiobook, because the writing style is simple, but I'm not saying simple in a bad way. It's just because it's YA, I guess, at the end of the day. It's just written in a way that even if you're not paying attention to every word, or even if you're doing something else, you can just very easily follow along. Then I have read, for the horror, Japanese horror TBR, The Crimson Labyrinth by Yuzuki Kishi. This is a kind of famous book when it comes down to horror Japanese novels. I would definitely categorize this as a dystopian, kind of gross Hunger Games. That's how I would describe this in a nutshell. It's definitely more akin to Battle Royale in this sense. Now, Hunger Games, Battle Royale, all of these kind of books, not my genre. I don't like to follow along a bunch of characters thrown in a place to kill each other, because I know what happens. I can just figure out the end, basically. There is no surprise. I'm very much plot driven and also character driven, but the plot is very important. If I know from the first page where this is going, it's just boring for me. The fact that this was less boring than probably Battle Royale, for example, that it's not because I didn't know what was gonna happen, but because this was gross. It was just gross in some aspects. So if you are sensible to certain triggers, such as a bit of human body horror and all that, I would not read these. But make no mistakes, this becomes gross toward the end. It's very digestible though, dystopian, where you've got these characters that are all of a sudden waking up in these kind of desert or very remote area, and they have to find clues to get out of this labyrinth, which is called the Mars Labyrinth. The first half is definitely not horror. I would not categorize this as horror overall. I think it was just a bit of a misinterpretation of the genre. It's definitely more thriller in that sense. If you want to categorize this not as a dystopian, I would just definitely say a gross thriller. Probably. I don't know. It doesn't feel like horror. Just doesn't. And I give this 3.25 stars, which is higher than I was expecting, considering that I hate these kind of books, just because it was entertaining. I guess I don't mind body horror. I actually enjoy it. So I ended up finding this, oh, this is so gross. Let me keep going. And I read this fairly quickly. It's also written kind of big. It's very fluent writing style. Then I've read the only manga of the year so far, and I've read The Flowers of Evil, the complete edition. This is volume number 2 by Shuzo Oshimi. I initially became aware of this manga while I was researching to do my video on reading the most disturbing manga I've written. I'm gonna link this challenge I already completed last year down below if you want to check it out. I really enjoyed the challenge. Gave them a rating basically from the least disturbing to the most disturbing. So I'm not gonna spoil the rating in that video for this. But just overall, this is a contemporary manga with a definitely thrillerish, weird aspect to it. And in the first volume, you follow this boy who is one day at school and he has this huge crush on this girl. He steals her gym clothes one day, and he's seen all of this by this other girl who is kind of a tomboy outcast in the class, and is very rude girl, and she starts to blackmail him and call him a pervert, and it's about him embracing his perversions. I would not be able to describe this in any other way. This is one of the weirdest things I've ever read. Definitely one of the weirdest. Like, it's a contemporary, but so freaking weird. But this second volume I didn't really like. I gave it 2.5 stars. I think it was, again, weird as fuck as always, but also a bit meh. This is a kind of long series, and there is a risk of Viz becoming redundant. So I think he needs to start adding something new, which he does toward the end. And that's why it's not just a 2 stars. I gave that 0.5 because towards the end, something new starts to happen and I'm actually curious to continue on, and I will continue on. But overall, on average, it was like, okay, can we just, what's next? And we don't go on the what's next until the very last issue. I'd suggest these. Probably no one in their sane mind will probably appreciate these. I think this is a lot of this comes from the author personal experience of living this very conservative small town in Japan, and it does sound like a fantasy of a very frustrated man. If someone was to analyze what's happening here, it's a bit disturbing, to be fair. Me reading this doesn't mean that I condone or approve of what's being discussed in these. I'm just honestly curious. There is still light outside, but like the sky is black, and I can see from the weather forecast that there is a hailstorm coming. So
a few moments later.
The light sucks. I apologize for that, but I want to finish this and we're not far off. So then I read Nosferatu by Joy Hill, who's the son of Stephen King, as you might know. This is the story of Vicky. Vicky has some special powers for which she can travel around the country on her bike and she can retrieve lost things. I don't want to spoil too much on how she does it, but on her traveling around, she encounters this other man called Charlie Monks. And Charlie Monks is someone with powers as well, supernatural powers, who though use these powers for no good. He kidnaps children and their caregivers, their mothers usually, and the mothers meet a bad end and the children are whisked off to what he calls Christmas Land. And let's just say that Christmas Land is not as fun as the name might make it sound. I really enjoyed this one. It's on the long side, and if I have to describe the negative things, I'd say definitely too much traveling descriptions. There were a lot of traveling around for obvious reasons, much related to the powers of these characters, but it was just too much. The description and all that, it got a bit boring after a while. And also, I wasn't that sold on Christmas Land. First impression is this is a book about vampires, and this is the first mistake. So I was lucky enough to read the synopsis, inform myself a bit more before getting to these, because if I was expecting a typical vampire story, I'd be disappointed. There are no typical vampires. No one is really a vampire in these. I think the term vampire must be used very, very loosely when it comes to this book. So don't expect a vampire story, even if, the car is called Nosferatu, because it's not. It is the story of a serial killer with supernatural powers and a supernatural car, which is called Nosferatu. And I guess that's why it gets confused, because this car is called Nosferatu. Now, I don't know about what's up with the kings and bloody magical cars. They really like those, apparently. As I was mentioning, I wasn't too sold about this Christmas Land thing. I think Hill ruined Christmas for me, because I cannot stop. If I think about Christmas now, I can imagine Christmas Land. I can think about Christmas Land and those children. I was like, creepy, creepy, creepy. I don't want to speak about Christmas. So thank you, Joy Hill. I'm not going to enjoy Christmas ever again. It was scary at points. Scary, I would say more disturbing than scary. Scary is probably a bit too much. There are some triggers in these, and I don't want to spoil anything, but basically there was this associate to Charlie Monks who commits horrible acts, and that disturbed me as a principal. I never like those things in stories, because also my job and all that, I found that extremely triggering and disturbing. So it's not a justification for me not to read a book. I will still read a book, but I would always find those aspects distasteful. His objective was to make me hate, and wish the worst for these characters. He managed to do that. So I really enjoyed Vicky and Lou, which are two of our main protagonists. I think they were so kick-ass for very different reasons, and they were such a beautiful pair, and I really enjoyed this. And also this was very funny. It's kind of a dark humor which I really appreciate. I found it funny, I found it hilarious, and overall for the length of this book it kept me intrigued and was interested enough, so I ended up giving this 4 stars. Then I have hosted / created a book club for my company, and we read 2 books every 2 months, and I've already read one, and this first week that I had to read was the Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, which is a crime novel very famous in England, at least now. It's like a bestseller or something. And this is the story of this bunch of very old people living in a kind of retirement house that have a passion for solving crime and mysteries. And they meet on Thursday and they solve old crimes. And this time though, they happen to be involved in the investigation for an open case, a new fresh case. So someone dies that they know, and they have the police solve the crime. It was a very cozy story. It gave me a lot of vibes of Murder, She Wrote, which is a TV show I used to watch with my grandma growing up a lot. So it gave me those vibes, and I appreciated those vibes. It was also kind of twisty. I recognized that there was a lot of twists and turns that you probably won't see coming, a lot of them, and said that when you got such a restrict amount of characters, there's just so much you can do. So some of the twists I was able to guess just because it was sometimes poor logic. There's a lot of feedback saying that this is so bloody clever, and I don't think it was that clever to justify such amazing reviews. Don't get me wrong, it was clever, but it was written in a way that if you're used to reading thrillers or crime books, you're gonna pick up the hints. So I guess if you're new of the genre, if you've never read a crime book, or if you just read a few, this is a good starting point. But I'd be a bit hesitant in judging this one of the best thrillers of the decade, or some of the reviews I heard about how brilliant this was. I think it was cozy, it was twisty, it was nice, but it wasn't as special as they make it seem. It's not my kind of thriller. I definitely prefer my thrillers more high stakes, more bloody, more gritty, more horrorish. This was very bland one, but again, it is something that might appeal to a vast audience, while I guess the thrillers I like to read are more specific. And finally, while the world is ending outside my window, I have read for ending series Tibia, Goddess by Josephine Angelini, and this is the 3rd and final book in a trilogy. The main idea behind this is that God's descendants, sons and daughters, become reincarnated throughout the ages, and their mechanism, their relationship, their hatred toward each other, they fights toward each other, and all that keeps being repeated. And there is also like prophecies in all of these and all of that. I love Greek mythology. I want to premise this. I really enjoyed this back in the day. I was reading this probably when I was 14 years old, 16 years old, if that. I was not the best series ever, but at the time I enjoyed it. I should have DNF'd this. It was a good idea, but a freaking nightmare. The execution, if it makes sense. It's not even the writing, because sometimes I tend to kind of give ratings to these books based on the targeted audience. So if I'm reading a YA, I know what to expect. And if it's a well done, then I should still, for how much I can enjoy it or not, I should still be lenient with my rating. Because I cannot, for example, fault a YA for not being explicit in its sex scenes, for example. I cannot fault a YA for being violent but never show true blood or never going all out there, because it's a YA and there are some expectations that comes with a label and the targeted audience. However, there are ways of doing this properly, there are ways to do this in the wrong way. So being a YA doesn't justify for mediocrity or for the book to be overall bad. Yeah, actually had potential. The execution of this was poor. The decision made by the characters were just silly. It was rushed. It was a lot of nothing for like 3/4 and just characters pining after each other. And then in the last 2 chapters, you put a lot of fighting scenes which you don't show us. You just tell us, oh, you know, they fought and this one or this other one, and that's it. so anticlimactic, and it was very convenient. Even putting aside my I'm an adult, I don't enjoy YA as much as before, I just couldn't with this. I had to recognize its faults no matter the target audience. So I ended up giving this 2 stars just because it's the writing. It's not the writing style the problem, it's the writing choices and decisions that she makes and what she makes these characters do mostly that sucks. And that was it, just in time for the sun to start coming up again. Thank you for watching, guys. For now, I'm gonna go because, yeah, there is just so much bad quality you can take in a day, right? Thank you for watching. Take care, guys. I'll see you next time. Ciao!